Hello, fellow parents. My name is Nikki Leonard, and I recently went to a training about how to help our kids succeed in distance learning. Much of the information they gave us was about how to empower your child to take control over their own learning, your 5-year-old all the way up to your college student. By helping your child to become more independent and take control over their own learning, similar to what they would have to be doing in the classroom, this whole distance learning thing will hopefully be a little bit easier. This empowerment process is a journey, but I was so encouraged by the tangible ideas they gave us that I decided I should share. Now, when I sat down to create these videos, I realized there's actually a lot of information, so I'll be releasing the information in several parts. This will be video 1, but stay tuned for future videos. I hope this information is as helpful for you as it has been for me. With that, let's get into it. Have you ever felt like your kid behaves differently in class than at home? Mine sure do. I've often felt as though there is some sort of magic spell that the teachers cast in the classroom that causes my kids to suddenly become more responsible and more adult. Certainly this is not how they behave at home. At the training, I was interested to find out that that magic is actually an environment that teachers create in their classroom to inspire executive function skills in our children. Unfortunately, distance learning will remove much of that environment from the teachers this year. So, this training will focus on how we can teach and support executive function skills at home. Hopefully, this home reinforcement of executive function will help both our teachers and our children to have a more successful distance learning experience. But before I can talk about how to teach executive function to our kids, we first have to know what it is. So, what is executive function? As shown by this graphic, executive function is a collection of processes in the brain that regulate our mental activities and our behaviors, allow us to plan new behaviors, and to transition into new tasks. These processes are complex and interwoven, but the training that we went to broke them down into these 6 categories. The first is activation. This is the ability to organize, prioritize, and initiate tasks. Now, of course, this applies to any task, but since we're speaking about our kids in school, we're going to be looking at learning tasks. Next is action. This is the ability to monitor and control your own actions. A key part of this process is that you, or your child, first need to understand where you are in a process. And then you need to know the steps to take to get to where you want to be. So for our children, this will be understanding where they are in the learning process and then knowing what steps to take to go farther. Focus is the next category. This is simply the ability to control what you give your attention to, or what your child gives their attention to. This, of course, includes being able to avoid those things that pull our attention away. Next, we have emotion. This is simply the ability to manage and modulate emotion. I say that simply as if that's an easy task. Again, a key part of this ability is to recognize the emotions that we are having, or for our child to recognize the emotions they are having, possibly to understand what's causing them, and then also to have the tools to manage our responses. Next, we have effort. This is the ability to regulate alertness and sustain effort. Basically, how do we keep going when we're bored, sleepy, tired, etc. Lastly, we have memory. This, of course, is the ability to access our memory. This encompasses behaviors like simply remembering tasks or information, but also more complex behaviors like using working memory to help pull many ideas together into a big picture. Whew! Those are some big goals. Can you imagine if our kids did all those things? Woohoo! Imagine if we could do all those things. Yeah, we'd be superheroes. Certainly, we can see that we are all a work in progress when it comes to executive functions. Now, you've probably tried to teach these things to your kids before, and you're thinking, yeah, there's no way my kids are going to do these things. And you're a little bit right. These processes take place in the frontal lobe, which is not fully developed until we're in our early 20s. which means we really can't expect that our children will excel at any of these things just yet. However, they certainly have the potential to develop them, and the earlier they practice them, the sooner they will become independent and responsible young people, and the better your distance learning experiences will be. All right, so now we know what the goal is. Let's get into specifics. For the rest of the series, what I want to do is talk a little bit more in detail about each category, and then give you tangible ideas to help your kid during distance learning. Again, this is just part 1, so we will only be addressing the category of activation in this video, but hopefully the other videos will be out soon. All right, you ready to dive in? Let's do it. Okay, activation. Remember, this is the ability to organize, prioritize, and initiate tasks. Unfortunately, the behaviors in this category are very much reinforced by the fact that our kids are physically in the classroom. This is because our brains are very visual. In fact, just being in a different environment gives clues to our brains to turn on different sets of operational guidelines. For example, when I'm in my bedroom, my brain tags certain things like sleep or relaxation as more important than work. Similarly, when I'm at my dining table, my brain is primed to think of eating. So when kids are in a physical classroom, their brains actually do operate differently than at home. But since our children will not be spending most of their school hours in a physical school, we need to do something external that tells our children's brains to shift into the school mindset. We call these external items cues. A cue does not need to be drastic, it just needs to be consistent. For example, when a friend of mine was a college student, she lit a particular candle every time she had to study. Soon, when that candle was lit, she found it was easier for her to focus on school. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that our kids have unattended candles, but I was just hoping to illustrate the point. For me, it's my desk lamp. It sounds kind of silly, but when I'm having trouble focusing, I will turn on my desk lamp even if I don't need the light. It's a signal to my brain that now is the time to start working. So, cues can be things that we can see, hear, touch, smell, feel, but some of the most powerful cues will be visual ones. So let's start there. A good visual cue will be anything that only comes out when school is in session and disappears when our school time is over. One of the best cues to activate the school mindset is actually to have a designated school spot that isn't used for anything else. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, that simply isn't an option. So, here are some things you can do to help designate a space, even if it's just your kitchen table. Of course, these are just suggestions, but here are some ideas. The first is a lamp. Again, this is something similar to what I use. It doesn't need to be removed from the table or anything like that. You just simply need to turn it on or turn it off. However, if you are working at a kitchen table and you want something to help designate the space, you can get a battery-powered lamp and put it up next to where the child is doing their work. Next is a particular figurine or a framed picture. Now, I wouldn't put a toy that's going to distract the kids and make them want to play with it, but if you have something kind of decorative that the child likes and makes them happy and comfortable, then that's a good idea. Another idea was this framed picture. It can be a picture of your teacher or of your school or of a inspirational quote, as long as it only comes out when school mode or school mindset is supposed to be there. Another thing we can do is to have a designated school supply box. So a lot of parents will say, like, well, I already have markers and I already have scissors, so, these things that you use for crafting, why don't you just use them for school? And while of course that makes logical sense, our brains sometimes aren't logical. And so it actually helps to have a designated supply box so that when children are getting into the tools that are in there, it tells their brain that this is school time. Another thing we can do is to actually use masking tape to designate an area. So this is particularly helpful if you are working at a kitchen table or if you have multiple children at one table. You can use masking tape to simply mark off a little desk area, and that will tell their brains that this is school time. Now, of course, that tape then has to come off when school is over. Now, another visual cue that we sometimes overlook is the things that we actually wear on our bodies. So it's important to make sure that kids are dressed in school clothes and that they have their hair done just like they would be going to school. If you have a kid that's having a particularly hard time, you might even suggest that they wear their shoes to get the mindset in the right spot. Another weird brain trick that you can try is to have the child wear something that makes them feel smart. There is actual research behind this. It doesn't matter what the object is as long as the child feels smart when they are wearing it. People that wear things that make them feel smart actually do better on tests. Another powerful cue is the movement of our bodies. When our kids are walking out the door, and then we drive them in our car to school, and then they walk to their classrooms, all of that movement is mentally preparing their brain for the shift into the school mindset. Obviously, we won't be doing that, but we can still use movement to prime their brains for school. So some examples of things you could do would be to simply get your clothes on, your shoes on, and get out the door for a walk. You can also have a dance party to a particular song to pump you up for the day. Or if you want something more calm, you could do 5 minutes of yoga or some meditation. And one aspect of movement cues is that they not only allow the brain to shift into the new mindset, but these will also help a child disengage from whatever they were previously doing. And that gives them time to mentally prepare for what's coming. So for example, if I were to rip my kid away from his crafting or his Legos and plop him in his school chair, he would definitely rebel. But if he's rebellious and moody while he's on his walk, that's okay. It gives him some space to reframe before he needs to face distance learning. Now, if all of those things seem a little complicated for your morning schedule, then even something as simple as a special handshake, which we've seen teachers use on social media, or a particular snack that they eat every morning right before school starts. Now, as I've mentioned, the best cues are visual or involve body movement, but even a particular sound can help. School bell, anyone? Or maybe you want to start your day with an inspirational song, or any particular sound like a gong or a service bell. Now, as a reminder, when school is out, these cues need to disappear. They only work because they are only present when the school mindset is engaged. So, when school is done for the day, you'll need to make sure that these physical items are packed up and out of the way. Now, regarding movement cues, you can choose different movement cues for the end of the day if you'd like, but if you use a sound cue to start the day, then you probably want to use the same sound cue to end the day. Lastly, there's really no right or wrong when it comes to cues. Everybody's different. Feel free to play around with what works for your family. Now, the last thing that I want to mention in this category is something to help alleviate the resistance that our children might have about entering into the distance learning school day. There are two big reasons why people resist tasks. The first is anxiety over the unknown. When we or our children feel like we can't wrap our brains around exactly what will be asked of us, or if we don't know what to expect to experience, we tend to resist entering into that task. Our children might be feeling this way about distance learning. To reduce this anxiety, make sure there's a visual schedule posted where they can easily see and understand. Once you have a schedule from your teacher, talk it through with your kids and help them understand each section of their day. If they're too young to understand schedules and time on their own, you should still post and refer to the schedule so that they can see that there is a structure. But you can also get one of these time timers from Amazon so that they can visually see how much time they have before the next break. A second big reason that people resist tasks is the anxiety over the size of the task. Students will often encounter this when sitting down to study for an exam. There's so much to do. Where do I even start? Often students will just ignore the task because of that initial first step is vague or overwhelming. In this case, what we need to do is break down the task into smaller, concrete steps. It's especially helpful for the first step to be the same every time. For example, I often find myself ignoring items on my to-do list that require multiple phone calls. My schedule is too crazy, my kid's behavior is too unpredictable to even envision being able to speak on the phone. However, I've recently discovered that if I break down the steps into one per day, I will actually get the task done. The first step for me is to simply look up the phone numbers I need and write them down. I don't call on that day. I just get the numbers. Then the next day I can tackle the calling whenever my schedule and the kids' behavior allows. We can do the same thing for our kids by setting up a routine for tasks. For example, when the school day starts. Step 1. Self-check. Am I hungry? Do I need to use the restroom? Step 2. Get out my school items and prepare my area. Step 3. Turn on Zoom. Seems easy enough to us, but to kids, having that simple checklist helps them to enter into the task. Once they are in the task, continuing the task takes less mental energy. All right, guys, just to recap where we've been. Today we looked at activation. We covered some ways to help us set up some external cues to help our kids shift into the school mindset. We also looked at ways to reduce the mental resistance kids might feel when they're asked to start their school day. The last thing I want to leave you with is something to help both you and your child reflect on this process. Remember that this itself is a learning process. Not all of these things will work for your kids or for your family. This will take some trial and error. But ultimately, we want the kids to feel like they are gaining the tools that they need and they feel empowered to use them. One way that we can do that is by including them in the reflection process. This is important because it models for them how to reflect on their own behavior. So, for activation, the question that we might ask might look something like this. I see you've been getting better at whatever it is. Getting ready for school, deciding which task to do, feeling motivated to do work, etc. And then you can ask them, what would you suggest to a friend who's having trouble with the same idea? Right? So I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to hearing feedback on what you guys have done with your kids. Be on the lookout for video 2, which should cover executive functions areas of action and focus. Good luck!